Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. As my listeners know, we spend a lot of time talking about literacy and math as core academic subjects that all of our students need to know. And today we are going to again be focusing on a conversation about math instruction, the beauty of math and how math is infused in almost every aspect of our lives. I'm really excited to be joined by my next guest, who is Jennifer Lenhardt. She is the author of the relatively new book, Common Denominators, Cultivating Engagement and Belonging in Secondary Mathematics. She is a former math intervention teacher in Oregon. The heart of this book, as she told me off camera, is helping leaders create an environment where all students thrive. And this goes along with her current work as Senior Manager of Services, Content, and Development at HMH, with this focus on leadership development, particularly looking at mathematics instruction. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Jennifer, one question I ask all my guests before we even get into the meat and potatoes of your book: how did the quality of math instruction become the area of expertise for you?
Great question. Thank you. I did not always want to be a teacher. I think a lot of people who were teachers say, I always wanted to be a teacher, and my path was a little different. My freshman year, I was at Ohio State as a flute performance major, and I thought that music would be my career. And then I realized that maybe wasn't a very lucrative career choice. And so I thought, what else am I fascinated with? Political science, heading into law school. I have attorneys in my family. And I thought, okay, law school seems like that makes sense. The summer before I started law school at the University of Oregon, I was having a conversation with my parents in the kitchen, and I had this big realization that by the time most folks need an attorney, a whole lot hasn't gone great. The analogy is that it's a little bit like being an ER doctor, and I think I'd be great at it, but I think that what would bring me greater joy would be being in preventative medicine. What is that career? Well, obviously that is teaching. Education is the place where maybe we can do some of that preventative medicine type investment in young people. And then it came down to, what do you want to teach? I had this background in music. I thought I'll be a music teacher. And then I just know the reality of public school budgets and the frequency with which the art programs are cut. What is the pocket that is essential to education where as a career, I might not have to fight every year to justify my position? And that felt like reading, humanities, math, and science. Sounds really cold, but tactical decision around what would this career actually look like. Then I realized I really like to be good at what I do. If a student has a medium level reading teacher or a medium effective social studies teacher, I don't think that they're at risk for falling all the way out of love with that subject. You can still recover. You can have neutral ground social studies teacher your sophomore year, and then your junior year, you could fall in love with the subject again. And that felt like a possibility. But with math, that's not the case. If you have a real tough time and a teacher that isn't able to create the learning experiences that really help you understand the mathematics and engage with it and see yourself as a learner and doer of mathematics, that sets you up. It's hard to rebound from. It's hard to recover from. So I'm going to try to be the very best at this for students. It's going to matter a lot in math instruction because it matters a lot when students don't have great math teachers.
I love that. And it really foreshadows what I'm about to ask, which is, what made you decide to write Common Denominators and to focus particularly on cultivating this engagement and belonging in secondary mathematics?
It's that job teaching math intervention. Students that are eligible for Tier 3 interventions, I think often the analysis of their skills and conceptual understanding that needs to be developed is in the area of the academics. So the conversation is often around where are they at with certain math standards? How are they demonstrating understanding of this thing or the other thing when it comes to math? And that's what I was prepared to teach, and that's what I was prepared to analyze. And then I got into the field and realized, okay, but also with adolescents, this is an identity development conversation alongside a math skills development conversation. Arguably, with all students, that's true, particularly salient at that secondary level with middle and high school students. It became so clear that there is something about who I am that's related to what I'm able to learn, or this perception of who I think my teachers think I am, or who I am inside of school, this identity piece. And where spaces for math learning have the opportunity to really move the needle for students is by creating spaces where you feel like you belong in here. Your whole identity belongs in here. Being a learner is a slice of an identity that we can continue to develop. And that we do that through creating these engaging learning experiences where you have access, you have the resources you need, you have the scaffolding and the support. These two pieces go hand in hand all the time. Engagement and belonging, it's sort of like instruction is inextricably linked to, or like instructional design is inextricably linked to so many pieces of how students experience their learning that day. What became clear to me in the classroom and then later consulting nationally when I would facilitate professional learning with adults as well, is that we have these almost calcified ways of being when we don't feel like we have access and when we feel like we don't belong. We are rarely hearing students say the words, I feel really disconnected from this learning, but we are seeing behaviors that signal disconnected from this learning, like storming out of class, like talking to their neighbors, like all these other things. They're above the surface, almost like the game Battleship. Ping, ping, ping. There are signals to us that we have some work to do to address these conditions in which our students are learning in order to create that engagement and belonging that drives learning overall.
One thing that I saw in your book that I really believe gets at this concept of connecting identity and belonging to math instruction is I know you just said that there are certain things that students don't tell us, but we
Yeah.
can see it in their actions that they're disengaged, storming out of class, frustrated, not trying. You divided your book into chapters that relate with things students do tell us, and then things that we tell each other as math educators. What are some of the things that students tend to tell their math teachers? What does that usually symbolize, or what's behind that? And then how as math instructors should, especially on the high school secondary level, should we address those questions that the students bring to our attention?
Each section of the book, each chapter dives into this in a different way, but it follows a similar structure for the reader to follow along, leading with a story. In the first part, things students say to us, I don't have a pencil. I'm not a math person. When am I ever going to use this? These are the anthems of secondary mathematics. This is a bid for some sort of connection or justification, but it's also a layer, if you will, that just reminds us that there is likely an unmet need here, and we have to figure out what it is. In the second part, when we talk about things student teachers say to each other, these are often related to the system, especially the sustainability of the practice for teachers who have 7 to 8 to maybe 10 preps. If you're teaching an AP schedule and you have Algebra 1 and remedial pre-algebra and all these other preps, I have 250 students. I can't possibly, whatever that is, deliver on that differentiated instruction or meet the needs of every individual student. The grading policies is a chapter in the book. The phrase that I've heard over and over again is, I don't give grades, my students earn them. There is a lot to explore there about what that really indicates, either about a belief system, the extent to which we feel trapped working inside systems that actually aren't just for students. Most grading systems are not equitable or just, or even important or meaningful for moving the needle on student learning. Each chapter in the book starts with a thing we've heard, and then there's a section about what's really going on here. It's possible there's a lot of variation going on there. And so what I surface in the book is, in my experience, it tends to be something about blank. When a student says, I don't have a pencil, it may be about actual material goods. And so I do share some practical tips for ensuring that teachers are able to get their hands on the supplies that they need without having to spend all of their own financial resources. But again, that goes to like, what's the job of the leader to make sure this is never a blocker for teachers? We work inside massive systems. I'd like to know what districts and building leaders are doing about this, because teachers, that isn't an individual classroom problem, just that's a learning. Anyhow, I digress. So when we think about what's really going on here, each section unpacks that, and then we talk about practical strategies to meet that actual need. An example of when am I ever going to use this? We could take that example for this conversation, which is just, it's notorious. When am I ever going to use this? In the book, I write about how that may be best interpreted or best heard as I'm either feeling disconnected from the content, the mathematics itself, or disconnected from this learning environment and the people inside of it. It's almost always an opportunity to ask more questions of the student individually. Do you need help getting started? Are you signaling that you just want me to know that you're here? I know you're right here. I got you. There are different students with a different need and assurance that they're still seen and they're still valuable and they're right there. Practical strategies for that. Maybe you do have a one-on-one conversation, or maybe you greet that student at the door ahead of class because you know this is the thing that they tend to ask. And you say, today we're talking about scaling figures, and I'm curious if you can find a way that this would apply to anything in your real life. I call it pre-funk the party. If this is a conversation we are having and we're wondering about, you tell me how you're going to use this. How are we asking students to make sense and make connections across? When a student says to us, prove to me that this is related to my life, in many interesting ways as an adult, we can say, oh, connection making is a key part of the brain and logic development that we're working on as a 7th grader. So I'm going to ask you, what connections do you see to your real life? Because you less need an answer from me and more need the practice making these connections to your own life. I also think it's important to understand that we don't need to give students fake answers. And in your real life, do you need to use differentials or differential equations? Maybe never, depending on the career you choose. But that's where we think about the math practices. When will you ever need to make sense of something that doesn't make sense right away? When will you ever need to collaborate with others and communicate your understanding or the questions you have? When will you need to isolate a variable and try to figure out the parts that are affecting that? When will you ever need to find a pattern? Those are all the time things. Teachers, we don't need to offer a manual like, well, if you're ever deciding how much paint to buy, listen, I've painted every single room in my house, and not a single time have I calculated the actual area of the wall and looked at the manufacturer's recommendation. Not one time have I applied math in that way. But yet it's offered up. There's real world applications. I'm not sure that's what they're really asking, which is why it's not compelling.
Exactly. As you were speaking, the other stumbling block that sometimes could be the elephant in the room is, yes, we can ask our students, where would you use this math? But sometimes those of us teaching do know how you could apply it in the real world. And honestly, some of us don't. What would you recommend to teachers, secondary teachers, for increasing their own knowledge about where the real world relevancy is in specific math content? So you mentioned differentials. Where would that be helpful real life information? And if I'm teaching it and I don't necessarily know that. Now, on the secondary level, hopefully math teachers do have more of that understanding. Maybe this is more, and I know your book is secondary, and maybe this is more a question for elementary teachers who are teaching all of the core content, but still, what would you recommend for an instructor of math to increase their knowledge of real world relevancy and how to help students? Because you mentioned making that real world relevancy connection for the students with the students. So what would you recommend in that regard?
I want to separate out what we're teaching in terms of content standards and how we're asking our students to be learners of mathematics and engage in mathematics. When it comes to a student saying, when am I ever going to use this? I think it's helpful for a teacher in preparation and in lesson planning to say, how am I having my students work through their learning here? Are they working individually and just checking their answers with the teacher? Am I able to structure this in a way that they problem solve together? Are they having any discussions where they have to make sense of what someone else is saying? shore it up against what their own understanding is, address any gaps, and reach some shared common understanding. Those math practices and the Common Core, how would my students know whether or not their answers are roughly correct, or if they're headed in the right direction? Or if the strategy they're trying isn't proving very useful, do they have any other strategy to try without giving up? How we work on mathematics in a math classroom, I think, is a more relevant conversation for when am I ever going to use this than the actual tactical part of the content standards that we're working on. So when will you have to scale this triangle to 1.5 times larger in your real life? I don't know. It really depends on the career you choose. As a sixth grader, when will you use unit rate? Those are the conversations where I don't know that that's the question we're really asking, but we also have to hear inside of that this subtext of a student saying, I'm not sure that even if I tried, I could find a way. So I'm going to start by not even getting into it because it's so painful to be confused in front of my peers. I will deflect. I don't see a path for me through this learning with some other signal that either makes me the class clown or gets me kicked out of class or distracts the teacher, because I'm trying to desperately avoid the vulnerability of saying, I don't think I can make sense of this even if I tried.
If I'm hearing you correctly, although there are those times when, yes, of course, teachers can bring in real world content, in keeping with the theme of your book, this theme of engagement and belonging, what you have found, if I'm understanding correctly, Jennifer, is that it's more about developing the sense of belonging by helping students work through their frustration, work together with others to solve a problem, have a sense of efficacy in themselves. It's really about the process in developing that real world relevancy as much as, if not more than, the specific content. Am I understanding that correctly?
It has been my experience that that is a more satisfactory answer to students than answering specifically how this mathematics is applied in their real life. There is a way to apply so much of the mathematics our students are learning. Some of it there's not. If we think about the long division algorithm, is this necessary for dividing numbers in your real life? Nope, it's not. But here it is, part of the standards or part of what's required to teach in many states. Our students are smart and they can suss out that's a nonsense answer about when am I ever going to use this. I ask students directly, do you really want an answer to that question, or do you need something else? Do you need a hand getting started? Do you really want to know? Because we can have that conversation, but if that's not what this is really about, I'd rather talk about what this is really about. And maybe in this conversation, I can help students learn to find the words that we shift. And I tell this story, we start saying things like, this doesn't make any sense to me and I don't even want to try. Those are real and honest words, and I can meet you right there because now I know a little bit more about what you need. But I have to create a space where we belong and we're safe in order for a student to have an opportunity to tell the truth about what's going on with their understanding.
On that point, developing these classrooms where students do have this sense of belonging, where
Yep.
you are having the real conversations around why are you not even trying, or why are you getting frustrated? What do those classrooms look like for engendering belonging when we teach math at the middle school and high school level? Are there certain conditions or processes, certain pedagogy that's used in those classrooms more than those that don't have that sense of belonging?
It's a great question. There's a lot of variability there because individual teachers know their student population the best. In secondary class, how I create belonging for second period may be different than sixth period because of the human beings that are in that room with me, because of the time of day that we're working through this. It's a great question. I think there's spaces that are responsive. Classes where belonging is the norm are places where the teacher has a clear understanding of their own identity in this space and a deep awareness of the identities of the other students in the room that are developing. And I talk a lot in many contexts. The work of teaching often is about knowing who I am and ensuring that I'm making space for who you are and holding that. I'm unbothered by a student who has deep frustration with mathematics. I'm unbothered, but I'm deeply confident that I can meet the needs or reach out to colleagues and collectively in our school or across our district to meet the needs of the individual students that are here. My job is to be a noticer of those things and to be able to say that need is real. A student is surfacing for me that they need something in this learning environment in order to belong. That's not up for negotiation. Those needs are real. And it's my job to say, given the reality of the needs that are surfacing, do I have the skill set to meet those needs right now? Do I need to reach out to colleagues and get additional skills? How do we meet the needs? But wishing that wasn't the case or saying like, it's too bad that kid didn't learn that in the third grade. This is unhelpful across the board. Your reality is real. And I'm grown up, confident that we can find a way to get you what you need here in school.
What resonated for me when looking at your book is this concept of radical acceptance. Rather than saying, which we often do, oh, if only the student knew their math facts. Rephrase that. This is a golden nugget in our conversation. Rephrase that from, I wish my student knew their facts better than they do, to what you say in the book. Rephrase that, instead say something like, because my students don't know their basic math facts.
That's right.
This is what I'm going to do next. This is what we have to do next. So you move problem to solution.
That's right. That dumbfounded moment or the shocked moment or the disheartened moment or the here we go again with students with these things that I wish they didn't have the trauma that they have. I wish that they all had the nutrition that they needed. But that doesn't change the fact that I have a responsibility and an opportunity to address these actual needs. And I really want to emphasize is working collaboratively and working with the system. And for building leaders and district leaders, we can't push down individual classroom solutions to systemic situations.
You also mentioned earlier, because now we're shifting, I think, looking more at teacher sense of belonging. You had mentioned this a couple of times. You mentioned this in the book, and you mentioned this in our conversation a couple of times, which is this attitude that teachers have, not unjustified. Oh, I can't possibly teach or provide the needs to 250 students. There, the teacher is demonstrating a lack of efficacy, a lack of control. I truly believe that this sense of powerlessness does affect our retention rates of educators.
1,000%.
Bearing this in mind, we can't just put that all on the teacher. If the teacher is saying, I can't possibly meet the needs of 250 students, almost reframing that into a more radically accepting statement. Because my teachers, or because our teachers, our math teachers, can't meet the needs of 250 individual students, what are we as a system going to do? Am I understanding that correctly?
That's a great way to frame it. System leaders have a responsibility to continue to analyze the conditions in which they're asking their teachers to work. And when your teachers say to you, this is too much, then it is too much. If they say it's heavy, it's heavy. It's just like when a student says to a teacher, I am so confused right now. I can't think through this. That is real. They need a different approach or a break. So it's the same in systems and the conditions in which teachers are asked to work. And if there is something about the construct and the setup of daily practice that makes it unsustainable, that drives the burnout, that's creating the conditions for teachers to say, listen, I'm a creative person and I don't see a way through this. That's not an attitude problem. That's a systems problem. That's a lot of really powerful evidence that the conditions are not set up and that they can be addressed. Because there is a way to successfully and sustainably meet the needs, the individual and unique needs of students in public education. But it is not by pushing all of that individual need meeting down to individual classroom teachers and overextending, overworking, and exhausting the population of folks who are pouring their hearts into the profession.
What can systems do to support teachers, particularly secondary teachers, meeting more of the mathematical quote unquote needs? Or again, are those really mathematical needs or just social emotional sense of belonging needs across all content area? But how could specifically in a math class, how can we help teachers meet the needs of so many diverse students in a secondary math class?
Systems leaders have to listen. They have to listen to their people. That includes empathy interviews and having conversations with teachers where you just listen. You say, what is it that you're noticing? What's working? What's not working? And you have to listen across your group of teachers for the common denominators. What's common about what this teacher needs, what that teacher needs, what's underneath the surface? What is the root cause of what's going on here? And what are the systematic solutions we can co-create? Not top down, but co-create as the practitioners of the classroom things or the shifts in policies that we're talking about. They're at the table in the conversation, driving the creative solutions, leading with how might we, and trusting that the systems leaders will handle the system changes that are needed. In the chapter that I write about related to grading, this is a good example where as a teacher, I am required to follow the grading policy of the school, which happens to be the grading policy of the district. Well, it's an inequitable grading policy. I share this story in the book about how there's a system constraint where the grades aren't considered completely entered at the semester if a student is marked incomplete, INC. And the admin was asking me to change those to zeros. I'm not doing that. I'm not putting in zeros for work students never had the opportunity to complete, whether because they were absent or this is truly incomplete learning. I will not mark it as a zero. And the admin was, well, the system won't, your grades aren't complete. You haven't fulfilled the requirements of your job. And that's that moment as an educator. That's a you problem. That's a system problem. That's an IT problem. That's a coding problem. I'm not going to do the thing that sets students backwards and feeling like a big zero or an F. I won't contribute to the cycle. But that takes a certain amount of power on my part and a recognition of my own privilege that I won't be fired over this. That's where the system leader has to say, you know what, you're right. And I, as the principal, can talk to the district or the IT people. That's my job, to go handle the part of the system that's not helping students learn on behalf of my educators. As an individual classroom teacher, I have to devote my energy to meeting the needs of my students, not fighting the system. I need my leaders to go fight the system, please, and go change those things so that I can continue to devote my energy and my resources to creating high quality learning opportunities for my students. So what are the leaders doing about that to create the conditions? Where are they advocating? Where are they protecting their people in the way that teachers are protecting their students and teachers are advocating and really investing an incredible amount of time and energy creating the types of learning experiences that their students need?
Going back to this idea then of teachers focusing on the needs of their students, their sense of belonging needs in a math classroom. Can you give one or two tools, perhaps,
Sure.
that secondary math teachers can use to develop this sense of belonging in their classrooms?
Any strategy or recommendation or shift in practice that educators might consider, I really want to honor that the aim is to also create sustainable practices that do not create the need for teachers to just keep working more and working harder, that's not it. These have to be humanized strategies that do two things at once. They have to meet the educational needs of students while also lightening the load of teachers and ensuring a more sustainable practice overall, so that teachers are not leaving each day or each week or each year utterly exhausted from the level of effort they had to put in order to make some things happen. For all the teachers, all the listeners, when you hear something, if you think, I can't see how that lightens my load, then don't do it. One of those strategies, I've developed a station rotation process. In secondary, I found that it was less common for secondary math teachers to be rotating students through small group and workstations. The essential part of that was I needed to be able to have individual instruction conversations or small group instruction conversations. If I'm 1 to 28, 1 to 35, I need a chance to hear and talk to these 7 kids about what it is that they're really understanding. I need to hear their logic because not everything they understand is written down. I need to really know what it is that they're understanding and not understanding about the mathematics. The other thing in these long class periods, so if you teach an AB block, maybe 85, 95 minutes, students need a chance to take a break from what it is that they're learning and shift gears a little bit, especially if the thing that they're learning is challenging or difficult. In the book, I write about how I set up station rotations. Part is about math games that are actually specific skill building Or we mentioned, we know there's something to build in here about number sense, the basics of how operations work. I can create number puzzles and learn from my elementary colleagues about how to develop number sense through games, dice games, card games, those types of pieces. That's one station break. It just feels different. And it's also revisiting these key skills. Or another station might be a chance for students to work independently, getting a social break from always interacting with their peers, and a chance to think their own thoughts, try their own things, check with each other if they need to, but also that cognitive downtime of thinking on their own. If you have technology, incorporating technology station, there's lots of great apps students can be engaged with. Thinking of a third or fourth station, and then a chance for small group instruction, a chance for me to really have a few moments to really hear individually, look a student in the eye, say their name, ask how their day was going, really see each individual student in that class period and help them know that they are known, both mathematically, but also as a human being. In order to create station rotations where there's accountability, think about this, preteens, teens, like, are we on task over here? There's an on-ramp. There's a set of strategies we do. We practice expectations. We build small intervals of time, 3 minutes at this station, and then we're going to rotate to the next one. I'm not going to give you enough time to digress or enough time to get off task and then establish the neural connections that say, oh, I can just goof around over here because no one's enforcing anything. Practicing those behaviors, again, we can learn a lot from our elementary colleagues about how we teach accountability, how students develop independent learning skills, how we support them in that, what that on-ramp looks like, so that by December, January, February, we are a well-oiled machine in here. Students know what to expect. They know when they can get help. They understand that they will be seen individually in this class setting. It's not for every day. There are some days where we're learning a whole thing as a class, and there are some days where we're engaged in whole class learning. But station rotations, it's a sustainable practice where I have what I need instructionally, which is some more one-on-one time with students, and students are getting what they need instructionally, which is some differentiated practice opportunities, some choice, some agency. There's choice at the games, there's choice at the independent practice station. We thrived in that instructional setup. I would just caveat it by saying, teaching behavior expectations, practicing those things, making it so clear that students understand what's expected of them, all of that's worth the investment, worth the time investment, to then get to that place where you feel you really can have some incredible independent learning happening with students, some big ahas, a shift in energy, a chance to have those social connections. I hear teachers talking about, they just won't stop talking. And I think the need is to talk. Might there be a way to incorporate some additional opportunities for chatter? And I don't want to say that this is all roses and sunshine, because there are certainly days, y'all, we have to stop talking about the football game. But when students see the effort that you put into getting to know them, whether there's get to know you bingo or initial surveys or those one-on-one conversations, and then they start to see some aspects of their identity incorporated into the instruction, it really goes a long way.
Jennifer, you've said so much. One, how do we get our elementary, middle, and high school teachers working together more and sharing strategies? Because I think you're right. I think you see stations more at the elementary level than the high school level, but it doesn't have to be that way. I even use rotations when I do trainings with adults. That's a strategy that is multi-age appropriate. It's what you're doing with it that is grade specific or content specific. That's definitely one thing that resonated with me with what you're saying. How do we get high school educators looking at some elementary strategies that might be appropriate? For example, and we won't go into this, I had a whole conversation recently, Jennifer, with high school educators about using turn and talk. And I wrote a whole piece in ASCD on how it's not the strategy, it's the questions you're asking students to discover and analyze, that you should be using turn and talk as a high school educator. But anyway, I digress. I also just want to highlight very quickly, Jennifer, that I've had other guests on that have talked both about student engagement as well as math practices. I recommend folks listen to my episode with Dr. Ang and Peter Lilladal. And I also want to highlight for folks to check out an episode with Jose Bowen, who wrote a fantastic book on using AI for educational purposes. In our conversation that I'm having with Jennifer here on ways to change up our pedagogy in a high school, maybe ask ChatGPT, how do I do stations around this math concept?
Yep.
Or what is the real world relevancy of this particular content?
And again, there's this opportunity we have to say, like, these are really important questions to answer. How can I honor students' curiosity, provide the circumstances where they can be explorers and answerers of their own curiosity? So here's another opportunity to shift the tone for belonging. It's really powerful to say to students, you're asking important questions and you have tools to answer them besides asking me for either this lesson or this chapter or this unit that we're working on. Every time you find a relevance connection point, you get to put up a scout marker. We have ways to invest in students staying curious and finding answers to the stuff they want to know about. It's a really powerful move, shifting the spotlight. And when we just move the instructional move of moving that spotlight back to you and you tell me, where is that related to the things that you're already doing? We did a whole unit on patterns and pattern finding. One of the challenges for the way the classes were that I taught for intervention was 6th, 7th, and 8th graders all in the same room. My challenge became, what's the instructional theme or the overtones for the discrete needs of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders that are unique and different? But instructionally, we need to have something that holds us all together. We did this unit on patterns and pattern finding. And I had a student come in and she describes this social situation that's happening about girlfriends and boyfriends and breakups and fights. And she looks at me and she goes, it's a pattern. The same thing happens every week. Those are those moments. Pattern finding for algebraic expressions or becoming a noticer of patterns and therefore a predictor of outcomes. This is a very interesting thing for students. And when those moments sync up, it's pretty awesome.
It is indeed. So Jennifer, where can people find out more about you and the great work you're doing?
You can find me on Twitter at Jennifer L. Math. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Jennifer Lenhardt on LinkedIn. And then if you're interested in learning more about the book, check out Solution Tree website. You can search my name or the title of the book from their website. It's available on Amazon if you're interested. This is powerful work. I hope that teachers see their stories in this book and they see a path through some of the places where they felt stuck. I also hope leaders are able to read it and say, that part's my job. I can do that part and create the conditions for my teachers to have a little more breathing room in the profession that we're asking them to engage in that is intensely challenging now, maybe more so than ever.
Jennifer, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely to be here.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.